What would you do if the woman who spent 3 years telling you that you weren't good enough for her precious son suddenly saw your face plastered across every news channel in America as the winner of a $10 million lottery jackpot? What if that same woman who called you trailer trash and a gold digger was suddenly knocking on your door crying about family bonds and second chances? I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. That's exactly what happened to me, and the story of how I got there will show you that sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of justice. My name is Jessica Martinez, and I'm 29 years old. I work as a pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital of Denver, and until 6 months ago, I was married to the man I thought was the love of my life. His name was Brandon Whitfield, and he came from the kind of old money Colorado family that traces their lineage back to the railroad boom of the 1880s. The Whitfield name carries weight in Denver society. They own 3 luxury car dealerships, a chain of upscale restaurants, and enough real estate to make most people dizzy. Brandon's mother, Patricia Whitfield, sits on the boards of 4 different charities and has her picture in the society pages at least twice a month. She wears pearls like armor and speaks with the kind of crisp diction that makes you feel like you're being measured for inadequacy. I first met Brandon during a medical emergency at the hospital. His nephew had been brought in after a severe allergic reaction during a family gathering, and Brandon was the one who rushed him to our emergency department. While the medical team worked on stabilizing the boy, Brandon paced the waiting room, his expensive suit wrinkled, his normally perfect hair disheveled with worry. I was working the night shift, and something about his genuine fear for his nephew touched me. Most of the wealthy families we dealt with demanded special treatment and acted like their money could buy miracles. Brandon was different. He didn't mention his family name, didn't demand to speak to the head of the department. He just sat quietly, occasionally asking if there was anything more he could do. When his nephew was stable and sleeping peacefully, Brandon approached me at the nurse's station. His eyes were red from exhaustion, and he thanked me for the extra attention I'd given to the boy during his stay. We talked for nearly an hour about everything except his family's wealth or social standing. He told me about his work managing the family's charitable foundation, about his love for hiking in the Rockies, about how he'd always felt pressure to live up to expectations he never set for himself. 3 weeks later, he showed up at the hospital again, this time with coffee and pastries for the entire night shift. He said he wanted to properly thank everyone who had helped his nephew, but I could tell he was looking for an excuse to see me again. We started dating quietly, meeting for coffee during my breaks, taking long walks through downtown Denver, going to small restaurants where neither of us had to worry about being seen by anyone from his social circle. For 6 months, we existed in this perfect bubble where class differences didn't matter. Brandon never made me feel less than, never questioned my background or my family's financial situation. My parents, Maria and Carlos Martinez, had immigrated from Mexico when I was 3 years old. My father worked construction, and my mother cleaned houses for wealthy families in Cherry Hills Village, ironically including some of the Whitfields' neighbors. I grew up in a small apartment in Commerce City, sharing a bedroom with my younger sister Sophia until I graduated high school. Every dollar my parents earned went toward necessities and saving for Sophia's and my education. I worked 2 jobs through nursing school, cleaning office buildings at night and serving tables on weekends. When I finally graduated and got my position at Children's Hospital, it felt like winning the lottery just to have a steady paycheck and health insurance. Brandon knew all of this, and it never seemed to matter to him. He would pick me up after my shifts in his modest Honda Civic, not the BMW or Mercedes that sat in his family's garage. He wore jeans and sweaters when we were together, saving the designer suits for family obligations. For a while I myself believed that love really could conquer all, that the gap between our worlds was just geography that could be bridged with genuine affection. The first crack in our perfect bubble appeared when Brandon finally worked up the courage to bring me to a family dinner. It was a Sunday in early spring, and Patricia Whitfield had insisted on meeting the woman her son had been mysteriously spending time with. The Whitfield estate sat on 5 acres in Cherry Hills Village, with a circular driveway that could accommodate a dozen cars and gardens that required a full-time landscaping crew. I spent 3 hours getting ready, choosing and re-choosing my outfit, finally settling on a conservative navy dress that I'd bought specifically for the occasion. Brandon assured me that his mother would love me, that once she got to know me, my background wouldn't matter. He believed his own words, and his confidence helped calm my nerves as we pulled through the electronic gates of his family's property. Patricia Whitfield answered the door wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater and pearl necklace that probably cost more than my monthly salary. She was beautiful in the way that money makes possible, with perfectly styled silver hair and skin that had been maintained by Denver's best dermatologists. When Brandon introduced me, she extended her hand with the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. The dinner was a masterclass in subtle humiliation. Patricia asked about my family with the kind of interest that felt more like an interrogation. Where did my parents work? Did I have a college fund growing up? What neighborhood did I grow up in? Each question was delivered with perfect politeness, but the subtext was clear. She was cataloging all the ways I didn't belong. When she learned that my mother cleaned houses, Patricia's eyebrows raised just slightly. "How interesting," she said, cutting her prime rib with surgical precision. "I imagine that's taught you the value of hard work." The comment sounded like a compliment, but it landed like a backhanded slap. Brandon's father, Robert Whitfield, was kinder but distant, asking polite questions about my work at the hospital while clearly counting the minutes until the meal would end. Brandon tried to steer the conversation toward safer topics, talking about my dedication to my patients, my fluency in Spanish that helped with many of the hospital's families, and my plans to eventually pursue a master's degree in nursing administration. Nothing seemed to impress Patricia. When I mentioned wanting to work with underserved communities, she nodded politely and changed the subject to Brandon's upcoming business trip to New York. When I complimented the house and gardens, she mentioned how much maintenance such a property required and how important it was to choose a lifestyle partner who understood the responsibilities that come with certain expectations. After dinner, while Brandon was helping his father with something in the study, Patricia invited me to see her rose garden. We walked among the perfectly manicured beds in the fading sunlight, and she spoke more directly than she had all evening. "Brandon is a sensitive young man," she said, deadheading a few spent blooms with silver garden shears. "He's always been drawn to causes, to people who need helping. It's one of his most admirable qualities, but also one that concerns me as his mother." I waited for her to continue, knowing that anything I said would likely be used against me. "I'm sure you're a lovely girl, Jessica, and I can see that you care for my son, but caring isn't always enough, is it? Brandon has responsibilities to this family, to our legacy, to the community that depends on our leadership. Those responsibilities require a partner who understands the weight of our family name, someone who can navigate the complexities of our social obligations." She paused by a trellis covered in climbing roses, her perfectly manicured fingers touching the thorns without flinching. "I've seen what happens when people from very different backgrounds try to merge their lives. The differences that seem charming during courtship become sources of resentment and conflict when real life intervenes. Children suffer. Families fracture, and young men like Brandon who have generous hearts often sacrifice their own futures out of misplaced loyalty." The message was clear, but Patricia wasn't finished. She turned to face me directly, her blue eyes as cold as winter sky. "I'm not saying you're not a good person, Jessica. I'm sure you are. But being good isn't the same as being right for someone. Brandon needs a partner who can stand beside him in boardrooms and country clubs. Someone who understands the difference between charity and family responsibility. He needs someone who enhances his position rather than requiring him to constantly explain or defend his choices." I felt heat rising in my cheeks, but I kept my voice steady. "Mrs. Whitfield, I understand your concerns about our different backgrounds, but I love your son for who he is, not what his family has. I've never asked him for anything except his time and affection." Patricia smiled, and for the first time all evening, it seemed genuine, but not in a way that comforted me. "My dear, that's exactly what I'm talking about. You don't even realize what you don't know. This isn't about asking for things, It's about contributing to something larger than yourself, about understanding that some responsibilities can't be set aside for romantic ideals. We walked back to the house in silence, and I spent the rest of the evening smiling and nodding, while my stomach churned with a mixture of anger and humiliation. Brandon drove me home with apologies tumbling from his lips, insisting that his mother just needed time to get to know me, that once she saw how happy we were together, she would come around. But I had heard the finality in Patricia Whitfield's voice, seeing the calculation in her eyes. This wasn't about getting to know me. This was about protecting her family's interests from what she saw as an unsuitable intrusion. Over the following months, I tried to prove her wrong. I attended charity galas in borrowed dresses, smiled through dinner parties where I was the only person without a trust fund, and listened to conversations about vacation homes and private schools that might as well have been conducted in a foreign language. Patricia was always polite, always correct, but her message never changed. I was a temporary inconvenience that her son would eventually outgrow. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday evening in October. I had just finished a particularly difficult shift, having lost a patient despite our best efforts, and I desperately needed Brandon's comfort. I called him, my voice shaky with exhaustion and grief, and he promised to come over with dinner and just hold me while I processed the loss. 2 hours later, he showed up at my apartment, looking uncomfortable in his expensive suit, carrying takeout containers and an expression I'd never seen before. We ate in relative silence, and when I tried to talk about my day, about the family I'd had to comfort and the questions I was asking myself about whether I could have done something differently, Brandon seemed distracted. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Finally, I asked him directly what was wrong. He set down his fork and looked at me with eyes full of conflict. "My mother thinks we should take a break," he said quietly. "She thinks we're moving too fast, that we should both explore other options before making any serious commitments." The words hit me like a physical blow. "And what do you think, Brandon?" He was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. "I think I love you, but I also think my mother might have some valid points about compatibility and long-term expectations." Compatibility? I felt my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "We've been together for over a year. We share the same values, the same sense of humor, the same dreams about making a difference in the world. What exactly are we incompatible about?" Brandon shifted uncomfortably. "It's not that simple, Jess. There are things about my family's life, about the expectations and responsibilities that come with our position in the community, that you don't fully understand. My mother thinks that trying to bridge that gap might be unfair to both of us." I stood up from the table, my heart pounding. "Your mother thinks or you think? Does it matter?" he asked. And that question told me everything I needed to know. We broke up that night, officially and quietly. Brandon moved out the few things he'd kept at my apartment, and I returned the key to his place. There were no dramatic scenes, no shouting matches, just a slow, sad dissolution of everything I thought we were building together. For weeks afterward, I replayed every moment of our relationship, wondering if Patricia had been right all along. Maybe I was naive to think that love could overcome such fundamental differences in background and expectations. Maybe Brandon deserved someone who could navigate his world without effort, someone who enhanced rather than complicated his life. But even in my darkest moments of self-doubt, I knew that what we had felt real. The man who had worried about his nephew, who had brought coffee to overworked nurses, who had listened to my dreams about advancing healthcare for underserved communities, that man had loved me for exactly who I was. The question was whether that man was strong enough to exist independently of his mother's expectations. As winter set in and Denver was blanketed in snow, I threw myself into my work with renewed focus. I picked up extra shifts, volunteered for the most challenging cases, and started researching graduate programs that would allow me to expand my impact in pediatric healthcare. If I wasn't going to be Brandon Whitfield's wife, I was damn well going to be the best version of Jessica Martinez I could become. I had no way of knowing that in just a few months, A simple decision to buy a lottery ticket would turn my world upside down and force Patricia Whitfield to confront the true meaning of worth and value. I had no idea that the universe was preparing to teach all of us a lesson about the difference between inherited privilege and earned respect. All I knew was that I had survived Patricia Whitfield's judgment and emerged with my dignity intact. Little did I know that the real test was still to come. The months after Brandon and I ended things passed like a blur of double shifts and deliberate exhaustion. I discovered that heartbreak has a peculiar relationship with routine. The more structured my days became, the less space there was for the ache that lived somewhere between my ribs and my spine. I volunteered for every holiday shift, every difficult case, every training opportunity that came my way. Christmas at the hospital was particularly brutal that year, not because of the workload, but because Brandon had always talked about spending Christmas morning with me at my parents' house, experiencing what he called real family traditions, instead of the formal, catered affairs his family preferred. Instead, I found myself eating cafeteria turkey with the skeleton crew, watching families celebrate recoveries and mourn losses, feeling like I existed in some strange liminal space between other people's stories. My parents noticed the change immediately. Of course, Maria Martinez has the kind of maternal radar that detects emotional distress from 3 counties away. When I showed up for our usual Sunday dinner in January, looking like I'd lost 15 pounds and hadn't slept properly in weeks, she cornered me in the kitchen while heating up fresh tortillas. "Mija, you look like you've been wrestling with ghosts," she said, flipping tortillas with the same precision she brought to everything in her life. "Are you going to tell me what happened, or do I need to start making phone calls to find out who needs their ears boxed?" I hadn't told my parents about Brandon at all. Not because I was ashamed of them, but because I knew they would immediately understand what Patricia Whitfield had been trying to tell me. My father, Carlos, had spent 30 years working construction for wealthy Denver families. He'd seen enough interactions between the help and the homeowners to understand exactly how these social dynamics played out. But sitting there in my childhood kitchen, surrounded by the smells of cumin and cilantro, watching my mother's calloused hands work their magic with simple ingredients, I found myself telling them everything. About meeting Brandon, about falling in love with someone who seemed to see past backgrounds and bank accounts, about the dinner with his family, about Patricia's calculated cruelty disguised as concern. My father listened without interruption, occasionally nodding in that way that meant he understood more than he was saying. When I finished, he set down his beer and looked at me with eyes that held decades of experience navigating a world that didn't always welcome people like us. "You know what I learned after 30 years of working in those big houses?" he said quietly. "Rich people aren't evil, but they're afraid. They're afraid of losing what they have, afraid of their children making choices that threaten the family position, afraid of change they can't control. This woman, this Patricia, she wasn't attacking you personally, she was protecting what she sees as her territory." My mother made a sound that was somewhere between a snort and a laugh. Territory or not, she had no right to make our daughter feel small. "Jessica, you are a nurse. You save children's lives. You speak 2 languages. You earned your degree while working 2 jobs. What exactly does this woman do that makes her so much better?" "She was born with the right last name," my father said simply, "and she married someone who increased her social standing. In her world, that's enough." "Well, in our world, it isn't," my mother declared, sliding a plate of fresh tacos in front of me. "You eat, you sleep better, you remember who you are. And if this boy doesn't have the backbone to fight for what's right, then he wasn't worthy of you anyway." Over the following weeks, my parents' kitchen became my refuge. Every Sunday, I would sit at their small table, eating food that tastes like childhood and safety, listening to my father's stories about the wealthy families he'd worked for over the years. Not gossip, but observations about human nature, about the difference between class and character, about the ways money both reveals and conceals people's true selves. One evening in late February, while helping my mother clean up after dinner, I mentioned that I'd been thinking about going back to school for my master's degree in nursing administration. The idea had been floating around my mind for months, But Brandon's breakup had crystallized something important. I needed to build a life that was entirely my own, something that no one could take away or diminish. How much does something like that cost? My mother asked, always practical. I named a figure that made both my parents pause. Graduate school wasn't cheap, and while I had been saving money, the combination of tuition, books, and living expenses while cutting back on work hours would stretch my finances to the breaking point. We could take out a loan against the house, my father offered immediately. Absolutely not, I said firmly. I'm not risking your home for my education. I'll figure something else out. But my mother was already shaking her head. You know what? I'm picking up some extra houses. Mrs. Pemberton in Cherry Hills Village needs someone twice a week, and she pays well. Between that and what your father saves working overtime on the Morrison project, we can help. Mom, I can't ask you to work more so I can go to school. You're not asking, she said with finality. I'm telling you, your education is an investment in this whole family. When you become a nursing administrator, when you're running departments and improving hospitals, that success belongs to all of us. It took me 3 months to accept their help, and even then only because my father sat me down and explained something that shifted my entire perspective. Misha, when your mother and I came to this country, we had nothing except the certainty that our children would have better lives than we did. Every house your mother cleaned, every foundation I poured, every extra hour we worked, it was all aimed at this moment, when you would have the opportunity to reach for something bigger than what we could imagine for ourselves. He paused, his weathered hands folded on the table between us. If you don't take this chance because you're trying to protect us, you're actually dishonoring everything we sacrificed to make it possible. Our pride isn't in staying small to make other people comfortable. Our pride is in watching our daughter become the woman she's meant to be. So in March I applied for graduate school. I spent evenings after my hospital shifts writing application essays, gathering recommendations from doctors I'd worked with, researching programs that would allow me to maintain a full-time work schedule while pursuing my degree. The application process itself became a form of therapy, forcing me to articulate my goals and vision for my career in ways I'd never had to before. During this time, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Brandon had started dating someone new, Caroline Ashford, daughter of a prominent Denver real estate family, someone who had attended the same private schools and country clubs that had shaped Brandon's childhood. The news stung more than I expected, not because I wanted him back, but because it confirmed everything Patricia had been trying to tell me about his eventual choices. Spring arrived early that year, with crocuses pushing through the snow in March and trees budding by the first week of April. I found myself taking long walks through Denver's parks after work, processing the changes in my life, slowly building a vision of my future that didn't include waiting for someone else's approval or validation. One particularly beautiful evening in late April, while walking through Cheeseman Park, I ran into Dr. Sarah Chen, one of the pediatric attending physicians I'd worked with regularly at the hospital. She was sitting on a bench, reading a medical journal, enjoying the warm weather after months of Colorado winter. "Jessica," she called out, waving me over. "Perfect timing. I was just thinking about you." Dr. Chen had always been a mentor figure for me, one of the few people at the hospital who seemed genuinely interested in my career development, rather than just my ability to handle difficult assignments. "I heard you're applying for graduate school," she said, gesturing for me to sit beside her. "I wanted to talk to you about something that might interest you." She explained that the hospital was launching a new initiative focused on improving healthcare access for immigrant and refugee families in the Denver area. The program would need bilingual staff members who understood both the medical system and the cultural barriers that often prevented these families from seeking appropriate care. "The position would be perfect for someone with your background and skills," Dr. Chen said. "And the hospital is offering tuition assistance for staff members pursuing relevant graduate degrees. It's not a full scholarship, but it could significantly reduce your financial burden." The opportunity felt like a gift from the universe, perfectly timed and aligned with everything I'd been hoping to accomplish. But more than that, it represented validation that my background, The same background Patricia Whitfield had seen as a liability was actually a valuable asset in the right context. I applied for the position immediately, and within 2 weeks I was offered a role as program coordinator, with the understanding that I would transition into a leadership position as I completed my graduate degree. The work was challenging and rewarding in ways I hadn't anticipated, requiring me to serve as translator, advocate, and educator for families navigating complex medical situations while dealing with language barriers and cultural differences. One case in particular stayed with me. The Morales family had brought their 5-year-old daughter to the emergency room with severe abdominal pain, but communication difficulties had led to delays in diagnosis and treatment. By the time I was called in to translate and advocate, the little girl was in serious condition, and her parents were terrified and confused by the rapid succession of medical procedures. I spent 4 hours with that family, translating not just words but entire concepts about pediatric surgery, insurance procedures, and post-operative care. When the surgery was successful and the little girl was recovering well, her father pulled me aside and said something that lodged itself permanently in my heart. "You saved our daughter," he said quietly. "Not just the doctors, but you. Because without you, we would have been lost." Walking home that night, I realized that Patricia Whitfield had been wrong about almost everything, but particularly about contribution and value. She had talked about enhancing Brandon's position, about understanding family responsibility, about contributing to something larger than myself, but she had defined all of those things in terms of social standing and wealth maintenance. What I was discovering through my work was that real contribution looked different. It looked like using my bilingual skills to ensure that a scared family could understand their child's medical treatment. It looked like pursuing education not to climb social ladders, but to expand my ability to serve communities that needed advocates. It looked like building a career based on competence and compassion rather than connections and inheritance. Summer arrived with the kind of spectacular weather that makes people fall in love with Colorado. I was settling into my new role at the hospital, excelling in my graduate coursework, and slowly building a social life that didn't revolve around trying to fit into spaces where I wasn't welcome. I joined a hiking group for young professionals, started taking salsa dancing lessons with my sister Sophia, and discovered that I actually enjoyed my own company in ways I never had before. The breakup with Brandon, which had felt like the end of my romantic life, gradually revealed itself to be the beginning of something more important, a relationship with myself based on respect rather than compromise, ambition rather than accommodation. One Friday evening in late July, while shopping for groceries after work, I made a decision that would change everything. Standing in line at the King Soopers on Colorado Boulevard, surrounded by the familiar chaos of weekend shopping, I noticed the lottery display near the register. The Powerball jackpot had climbed to unprecedented levels, and people were talking about it everywhere. I had never been a gambling person. My parents had raised me to be practical about money, to save rather than spend on long shots and fantasies. But something about that particular moment, maybe the satisfaction of completing another successful week at work, maybe the confidence that came from building a life entirely on my own terms, maybe just the summer evening energy that made everything seem possible, made me reach for my wallet. "One Powerball ticket," I told the cashier, feeling slightly silly but also excited in a way I hadn't experienced in months. She handed me the small slip of paper, and I tucked it into my wallet without looking at the numbers, already half forgetting about it as I loaded groceries into my car and drove home to my apartment. That night, I called my parents to check in. As I did every Friday, my mother was excited about a new contract she'd landed with a family in Highlands Ranch, and my father was telling me about a promotion opportunity that had opened up at his construction company. We talked about my classes, about Sophia's new job at a nonprofit downtown, about plans for a family barbecue the following weekend. As I got ready for bed, I emptied my wallet onto my dresser, sorting through receipts and business cards. The lottery ticket fell out among the other papers, and I picked it up, looking at the numbers for the first time. 15, 27, 33, 41, 52, and Powerball 18. They meant nothing to me at the time, just random digits generated by a computer. I stuck the ticket to my bathroom mirror with a piece of tape, thinking I might remember to check it after the drawing. But honestly, I was more focused on finishing a research paper for my healthcare policy class and preparing for a presentation at work the following Monday. I fell asleep that night, feeling peaceful and optimistic about my life in a way I hadn't for months. I had no idea that those random numbers would soon become the most important digits of my life, or that they would force Patricia Whitfield to confront everything she thought she knew about worth, value, and the true meaning of family. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp August air that promised a perfect Colorado day. I woke up naturally around 7, something that still felt luxurious after months of alarm-driven hospital schedules. My apartment was quiet except for the gentle hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of sprinklers watering the complex's landscaping. I had plans to meet Sophia for brunch at a new cafe in the Highlands neighborhood, followed by a hiking trip to Red Rocks Park. These sister dates had become one of the unexpected gifts of my post-Brandon life, time to reconnect with family relationships that I'd somewhat neglected during the intensity of my relationship. While making coffee, I noticed the lottery ticket still taped to my bathroom mirror. The drawing had been the night before, but I hadn't bothered to check the results. Lottery tickets were background noise in Colorado life, something people talked about when jackpots got large enough to make headlines, but not something that occupied much mental space for practical people like me. I grabbed my phone while waiting for the coffee to brew, more out of mild curiosity than any real expectation. The Colorado Lottery website loaded slowly, and I had to scroll down to find the previous night's Powerball numbers: 15, 27, 33, 41, 52, Powerball 18. I looked at the numbers, then back at my ticket, then at the numbers again. My brain seemed to be processing the information in slow motion, like a computer running an unusually complex calculation. The numbers matched. Exactly. I sat down hard on my kitchen stool, the phone still in my hand, staring at the screen. Then I stood up and walked to the bathroom, holding my phone next to the ticket, comparing them digit by digit: 15, 27, 33, 41, 52, and Powerball 18. They were identical. The website indicated that one winning ticket had been sold in Colorado, worth approximately $127 million for the jackpot winner. $127 million. The number was so large it felt abstract, like a figure from someone else's reality. I called Sophia immediately. "You're early," she answered cheerfully. "I'm not even dressed yet. Can we push brunch back 30 minutes? "Sophia," I said, and something in my voice must have alarmed her, because her tone changed immediately. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "I think I won the lottery." There was a long pause. "What do you mean you think you won the lottery?" "I bought a ticket yesterday and I just checked the numbers. And they match. All of them." "Jess, are you sure?" "Like absolutely sure." I read her the numbers from the website, then the numbers from my ticket. She was quiet for a moment, and I could hear her moving around her apartment. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh my God, Jessica, what do you do now?" That was an excellent question. I had absolutely no idea what someone was supposed to do after discovering they'd won $127 million. The practical part of my brain, trained by years of nursing crisis management, kicked in automatically. "I need to secure the ticket," I said, carefully peeling it off the bathroom mirror. "And I need to figure out the claim process. And I probably shouldn't tell anyone else until I understand what this means." "Too late," Sophia said. "I'm coming over right now. Don't go anywhere. Don't talk to anyone. And for the love of God, don't lose that piece of paper." While waiting for Sophia, I did what any millennial would do. I Googled what to do if you win the lottery. The results were overwhelming and slightly terrifying. Articles about lottery winners who had lost everything within 5 years. Advice about hiring financial advisors and tax attorneys. Warnings about the psychological impact of sudden wealth. Stories of families torn apart by money disputes. Sophia arrived 20 minutes later with a bag of bagels and cream cheese, as if carbohydrates were the appropriate response to life-changing news. "Maybe they will." "Show me," she said immediately, setting the food on my kitchen counter. I handed her the ticket and my phone with the website still open. She studied both for a long time, comparing them with the same methodical attention she brought to her nonprofit budget reviews. Jesus, Jess, this is real. You actually won. She looked up at me with wide eyes. What are you going to do? I have no idea, I admitted. This morning I was worried about my student loans and whether I could afford new tires for my car. Now apparently I'm worth more money than I can even conceptualize. We spent the next hour researching the lottery claim process, learning about the difference between annuity payments and lump sum distributions, trying to understand the tax implications of sudden wealth. The Colorado Lottery office wouldn't be open until Monday, which meant I had an entire weekend to process this information before taking any official action. You have to tell Mom and Dad, Sophia said, spreading cream cheese on a bagel with unnecessary focus. I know, but how do you even begin that conversation? Hey, remember how you've been working extra jobs to help with my graduate school? Well, funny story. You tell them exactly like that, Sophia said firmly. They've spent their entire lives working for this family's future. This is that future arriving ahead of schedule. That afternoon, we drove to our parents' house in Commerce City. The modest two-bedroom home where I'd grown up looked different somehow, not smaller or less important, but existing in a new context that I was still trying to understand. The carefully maintained front yard, the wooden fence my father had built himself, the small vegetable garden my mother tended with religious devotion, everything felt both exactly the same and completely transformed. My parents were in the backyard. My father, working on a sprinkler head that had been acting up. My mother, harvesting tomatoes for salsa. They looked up when Sophia and I came through the back gate, and my mother immediately noticed something in our expression. What happened? She asked, setting down her basket of tomatoes. I sat down at the picnic table my father had built when Sophia and I were children, the same table where I'd done homework and eaten countless family dinners, and I told them everything. About the impulse purchase, about checking the numbers that morning, about the reality that their daughter had apparently become one of the wealthiest people in Colorado overnight. My father's reaction was characteristically measured. He sat quietly through my entire explanation, occasionally nodding, asking practical questions about the claim process and tax implications. My mother's response was more emotional, tears of disbelief, then laughter, then more tears. Mija, she said finally, reaching across the table to take my hands. Do you understand what this means? I'm still figuring that out, I said honestly. It means you never have to worry about whether you're good enough for anyone ever again, she said fiercely. It means you have the resources to help any community you want to help, to make changes you want to make, to live exactly the life you choose. My father was more cautious. Money changes things, he said quietly. It changes how people see you, how they treat you, what they expect from you. You're going to need to be very careful about who you trust and what decisions you make. We spent the rest of the afternoon and evening talking through the implications, the possibilities, the concerns. My parents had questions about everything from security to investments to whether I would still want to finish graduate school. Sophia wondered aloud whether I would move out of my apartment, travel the world, start a foundation. The truth was, I had no answers yet. The only thing I knew for certain was that Monday morning, I would drive to the Colorado Lottery office and officially claim a prize that would fundamentally alter every aspect of my existence. Sunday passed in a strange haze of normalcy and surrealism. I went to Mass with my parents, something I hadn't done regularly since college, sitting in the same pew where I'd fidgeted through countless childhood services. The familiar rituals felt comforting, but I found myself distracted by thoughts of responsibility and purpose, wondering what obligations came with sudden enormous wealth. After church, my mother insisted on making a family dinner, as if celebrating something that hadn't quite become real yet. We ate carnitas and rice, talked about Sophia's work and my father's promotion opportunity, studiously avoiding the elephant in the room that was the lottery ticket now secured in a safety deposit box at my bank. That evening, alone in my apartment, I found myself thinking about Brandon for the first time in weeks, not with longing or regret, but with a kind of bemused curiosity about how this development would affect the narrative Patricia Whitfield had constructed about my worthiness and potential contribution to their family legacy. The irony wasn't lost on me. When I had been a working-class nursing student with immigrant parents, I wasn't good enough for the Whitfield family. But now, with a bank account that would soon exceed their generational wealth, what would Patricia's calculation look like? Would money magically transform me into an appropriate partner for her son, or would she find new reasons to disapprove? The question felt both petty and important. Petty because I had no desire to reunite with Brandon or seek approval from his family. Important because it illustrated everything that was wrong with systems that measured human worth through financial accumulation rather than character or contribution. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical for late August in Colorado. I had taken the day off work, telling my supervisor that I had personal business to attend to without elaborating on the nature of that business. The Colorado Lottery office was located in a nondescript building in Lakewood, the kind of place you might drive past 100 times without noticing. Sophia had insisted on coming with me, partly for moral support, and partly because she didn't trust me not to accidentally invalidate the ticket through some procedural error. We arrived 15 minutes before the office opened, joining a small group of people waiting outside. A few obvious lottery hopefuls clutching tickets, a couple who looked like they might be claiming a smaller prize, and a security guard who was probably used to people arriving early with life-changing pieces of paper. When the doors opened at 9 a.m., I approached the reception desk with my ticket, ID, and social security card. As recommended by all the websites I'd consulted over the weekend. "I'd like to claim a prize," I said, handing over the ticket. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and sensible shoes, took the ticket and scanned it with a device that looked like a grocery store barcode reader. Her expression remained neutral, but I noticed her posture straighten slightly. "Please have a seat," she said politely. "Someone will be with you shortly." Within 10 minutes, a man in a suit introduced himself as David Rodriguez, Winter Services Coordinator. He led Sophia and me to a private office where he verified my identity, explained the claim process, and confirmed what I already knew. I had indeed purchased the sole winning ticket for Saturday's $127 million Powerball jackpot. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of paperwork, financial explanations, and decision-making. I chose the lump sum option, which would net me approximately $89 million after taxes, still an incomprehensible amount of money, but somehow the reduction made it feel slightly more manageable. Mr. Rodriguez explained the timeline for receiving the funds, recommended financial advisors and tax attorneys, and provided security advice for newly wealthy individuals. He was professional and efficient, treating the transaction like the business arrangement it was rather than the life-altering event it felt like. By noon, I was officially a multimillionaire. The ticket had been verified, the paperwork completed, and arrangements made for fund transfer within the next week. Sophia and I walked out of the building in a state of shell shock, blinking in the sudden sunshine that had broken through the morning clouds. "So," Sophia said as we got back to my car, "what do you want to do first?" I looked around the parking lot, at the ordinary Tuesday traffic, at people going about their normal lives while mine had just been fundamentally restructured. "I want to go back to work," I said finally. "I want to finish my shift schedule for this week, complete my graduate school assignments, and figure out what this means for everything I've been working toward." Sophia nodded approvingly. And then I think it's time for Patricia Whitfield to learn something about the difference between inheriting worth and earning it." As we drove back toward Denver, I realized that winning the lottery had given me more than financial security. It had given me the ultimate opportunity to define my own value system, to demonstrate what I actually believed about success, contribution, and human worth. The game was about to change completely, and for the first time since my relationship with Brandon ended, I was genuinely excited to see what came next. The first sign that my life had irrevocably changed came on Wednesday morning, 2 days after claiming the lottery prize. I was in the middle of administering medication to a 7-year-old patient, when my phone started buzzing incessantly in my scrub's pocket. By the time I finished with the child and checked my messages, I had 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, and dozens of social media notifications. The Colorado Lottery's Public Relations Department had issued a press release announcing that the winning ticket had been claimed by a Denver area resident. And somehow, my name had leaked. The Denver Post's website featured a headline, "Local Nurse Claims $227 million Powerball Prize," accompanied by a photo they'd apparently pulled from my hospital's staff directory. I stared at my phone screen in the supply closet, watching the numbers on my social media notifications climb by the minute. Friend requests, messages from reporters, congratulations from people I barely knew, and requests for interviews, loans, and investment opportunities. My quiet, private life had evaporated in the span of a morning news cycle. Dr. Chen found me there 20 minutes later, sitting among the medical supplies with my head in my hands. "Jessica," she said gently, "are you all right? There are reporters in the lobby asking for you." "Reporters?" I looked up at her, still processing the reality of my situation. 3 different news crews, at least 2 newspaper journalists, and someone from a morning show who claims they want to do a human interest story about hard-working nurses who get lucky breaks. Dr. Chen sat down on a supply crate across from me. "I told security to keep them in the lobby, but they're persistent. I don't want to talk to reporters," I said immediately. "I just want to do my job." "I understand. But Jessica, you need to think about how you want to handle this. The story is already out there. Your choice is whether you want to control the narrative or let other people tell it for you." She was right, of course. But the idea of facing cameras and questions about my sudden wealth felt overwhelming. All I'd wanted was to quietly claim my prize and figure out how to use it responsibly. I hadn't anticipated becoming a public figure overnight. The coverage was generally positive, but it felt invasive and reductive. Reporters focused on my parents' humble jobs and my work ethic, creating a narrative about the American dream that simplified our complex family story into digestible sound. Friday afternoon brought the call I'd been dreading, but somehow expecting. "Jessica? It's Brandon." I was in my apartment, finally home after a week of navigating crowds of reporters and curious coworkers. His voice sounded exactly the same, carrying that particular combination of confidence and uncertainty that I remembered so well. "Hi, Brandon." I kept my tone neutral, professional. "I saw the news. Congratulations. That's incredible." "Thank you." There was an awkward pause. I could hear traffic in the background and wondered where he was calling from. "Listen, I know this is probably weird, me calling out of the blue like this, but I wanted to talk to you about everything. About how we ended things. About what this means for possibilities." I sat down on my couch, feeling suddenly exhausted. "What kind of possibilities, Brandon?" "I think we made a mistake," he said, his words coming faster now. "I think I let my mother's concerns cloud my judgment about what was really important. You and we had something real, something that money can't buy. And now that financial compatibility isn't an issue, financial compatibility," I repeated slowly. "Is that what you think our problem was?" "Well, not exactly, but you have to admit that the practical concerns my mother raised about our different backgrounds, about the challenges of merging different socioeconomic levels, those concerns are basically irrelevant now." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Brandon, do you hear yourself right now? What do you mean? 3 months ago, I wasn't good enough for your family because I came from a working-class background. Today, I'm suddenly reconsidering, because I have money. Do you understand how insulting that is?" "That's not what I meant," he said quickly. "It's not about the money itself. It's about the doors it opens, the opportunities it creates for us to build something together without the external pressures that complicated things before." "The external pressures," I said carefully, "were your mother's prejudices and your inability to stand up to them. Money doesn't fix character, Brandon." "Jessica, please. Can we at least meet for coffee, talk this through in person? I know I handled things badly before, but I've learned from that mistake." He was quiet for a moment. I think you're being unfair. I think I'm being realistic. But sure, Brandon. Let's have coffee, Saturday afternoon at Novo Coffee on 6th Avenue. 2 p.m. After hanging up, I sat in my apartment as evening shadows crept across the walls, thinking about the conversation. There had been no acknowledgement of the pain his abandonment had caused, no recognition of the courage it had taken for me to rebuild my life after he chose his mother's approval over our relationship. Just an assumption that my new financial status had somehow resolved our fundamental incompatibilities. Saturday afternoon at Novo Coffee felt like stepping back in time, except I was wearing a new dress that cost more than my old monthly rent, and Brandon looked nervous in a way I'd never seen before. He stood when I approached the table, kissing my cheek with the kind of familiarity that felt presumptuous after months of silence. "You look wonderful," he said, gesturing to my chair. "Different. More confident." "Thank you." I ordered a latte and waited for him to begin whatever conversation he'd orchestrated. "I've been thinking about us a lot lately," he said, stirring his coffee unnecessarily. "Social compatibility," I repeated. "Is that what we're calling prejudice now?" Brandon shifted uncomfortably. "My mother isn't prejudiced. She's protective. She's seen too many marriages fail when couples come from dramatically different backgrounds, and she was trying to spare us both the challenges that those differences can create." "What differences?" "Specifically? Well, things like educational expectations for children, social obligations, philanthropic commitments, the way wealth affects family dynamics." He paused, seeming to realize how his words sounded, "But obviously, those concerns are much less relevant now that you have the resources to navigate those situations comfortably." I took a sip of my latte, studying his face. He genuinely seemed to believe that money had magically solved the problem of his family's classism. "Brandon, can I ask you something? When you think about our relationship now, what exactly has changed, besides my bank account?" "It's not just about money," he insisted. "It's about opportunity. You can pursue graduate school without financial stress, travel, experience things that broaden perspective, contribute to causes that matter to both of us. The lottery win gives you access to a world that you couldn't have participated in before." "Access to your world, you mean?" "Access to opportunities that align with both of our values and interests," he corrected. I leaned back in my chair, watching him carefully. "What if I told you that I've decided to use the money to establish a foundation focused on healthcare access for immigrant communities? That I plan to continue working as a nurse while pursuing advocacy work for underserved populations?" His face brightened immediately. "That's amazing, Jessica. That's exactly the kind of meaningful work that would make such a difference. My mother has always been involved in charitable work, and she'd probably love to connect you with other foundation leaders in Denver. And if I told you that I'm planning to fund scholarship programs for first-generation college students, specifically targeting kids from working-class families like mine?" "Absolutely. That kind of educational philanthropy is something our family has always supported. You'd fit right in with the charitable community here." I set down my coffee cup, feeling a clarity I hadn't expected. "Brandon, do you understand that everything you just described is exactly what your mother said? I couldn't contribute to your family. That my background made me unsuitable for the kind of social and philanthropic leadership she expected from your partner. But now you have the resources to participate meaningfully in those efforts," he said earnestly. "I always had the ability to participate meaningfully. What I didn't have was your family's acceptance of my methods and background. Nothing about me has changed except the number in my bank account, but suddenly I'm worthy of reconsideration." Brandon frowned. "I think you're mischaracterizing what happened. My mother's concerns were practical, not personal." "Brandon," I said gently, "your mother looked me in the eye and told me that I didn't understand the responsibilities that come with your family name. She said I couldn't navigate the complexities of your social obligations. She implied that my background made me a liability to your reputation. She was trying to protect both of us from the challenges that come with significant socioeconomic differences." "No," I said firmly. "She was protecting her family's social status from contamination by working-class blood. And you agreed with her." "I didn't agree with her. I just I needed time to figure out how to address her concerns while honoring my feelings for you. How long did you need? Because you seemed to figure things out pretty quickly with Caroline Ashford. The mention of his current girlfriend landed like I'd intended it to. Brandon looked genuinely surprised that I knew about the relationship. Caroline and I. That's different. That's more of a social arrangement than a serious relationship. A social arrangement, I repeated. I mean, we enjoy each other's company, and our families have been friends for years, so it's comfortable and uncomplicated. But it's not what you and I had. I felt something shift inside me, a door closing definitively. Brandon, do you hear yourself right now? You're describing your current relationship as a social arrangement, while trying to convince me that money has somehow made me suitable for something deeper. That's not what I'm saying. That's exactly what you're saying. Caroline Ashford was acceptable from day one because she was born into the right family. I become acceptable only after acquiring enough wealth to overcome the liability of my birth circumstances. Jessica, you're twisting everything around. Am I, or am I finally seeing clearly what I was too in love to recognize before? I stood up, gathering my purse and jacket. Thank you for the clarification, Brandon. This conversation has been incredibly helpful. Wait, where are you going? I thought we were going to talk through the possibility of giving us another chance. We just did. And what I learned is that you still don't understand what was wrong with our relationship in the first place. What do you mean? I paused, looking down at him sitting at the small cafe table, his expensive shirt and confused expression making him look younger than his 28 years. The problem was never that I didn't have enough money to fit into your world, Brandon. The problem was that you didn't have enough backbone to defend what you claimed to love against people who judged its worth by irrelevant criteria. I left him sitting there and walked out into the afternoon sunshine, feeling lighter than I had in months. The conversation had accomplished something I hadn't expected. It had definitively closed a chapter of my life that I'd been unconsciously keeping open. But as I drove home, I realized that Brandon's call was just the beginning. If he had reached out, others would follow. And most importantly, Patricia Whitfield would eventually learn about my changed circumstances and would undoubtedly want to recalibrate her assessment of my worthiness. That evening, I called my lawyer. Something I could say now. My lawyer, and asked him to prepare for what I suspected would be an interesting series of conversations in the coming weeks. The real test of character was about to begin, and this time I would be the one holding all the cards. The call from Patricia Whitfield came exactly 1 week after my coffee meeting with Brandon. I was in my new office, something I still wasn't used to saying, reviewing proposals for the Martinez Foundation for Healthcare Equity, the nonprofit I was establishing with my lottery winnings. My assistant Rebecca knocked and entered with an expression I'd learned to recognize as someone important wants something. Mrs. Whitfield is online too, Rebecca said carefully. She says it's regarding a family matter and that you'll understand the significance. I stared at the blinking phone light for a moment, feeling a familiar tightness in my chest that I thought I'd moved past. Patricia Whitfield calling me directly was unprecedented. During our entire relationship, Brandon had served as the buffer between his mother and me, carefully managing their interactions to minimize conflict. Put her through, I said finally. Jessica, dear. Patricia's voice carried that same crisp authority I remembered, but there was something different in her tone, a warmth that felt carefully calibrated. I hope you'll forgive me for calling out of the blue, but I felt it was important that we speak directly. Hello, Mrs. Whitfield. What can I do for you? Well, first, I want to offer my congratulations on your extraordinary good fortune. The lottery win must feel quite overwhelming. Thank you. It's certainly been an adjustment. I imagine it has. Such a dramatic change in circumstances would challenge anyone's sense of equilibrium. I wanted to reach out because I've been doing some reflection about our previous interactions, and I fear I may have given you the wrong impression about my feelings regarding you and Brandon. I leaned back in my chair, fascinated despite myself. What kind of impression? I'm concerned that you might have interpreted my questions about compatibility as personal judgments about your character or worth. That was never my intention, Jessica. I've always recognized your intelligence, your work ethic, and your dedication to helping others. I see. The truth is, I was worried about the practical challenges that couples face when they come from very different economic backgrounds. Not because one background is superior to another, but because those differences can create stress and misunderstandings that threaten even the strongest relationships. Patricia paused, and I could hear the careful calculation in her silence. But obviously, your recent good fortune has eliminated those practical concerns entirely. You now have the resources to participate fully in the kind of life that Brandon has been raised to expect, which changes the dynamic considerably. Mrs. Whitfield, I said slowly, are you suggesting that my lottery win has somehow made me more suitable for your son? Oh, my dear, you are misunderstanding me completely. You were always suitable in terms of character and values. The lottery win simply removes the external pressures that I was concerned might strain your relationship. External pressures like your disapproval, external pressures like financial stress, social navigation challenges, the difficulties of merging very different family expectations. Her voice remained perfectly pleasant. Those pressures can destroy even the most loving relationships, regardless of the people involved. I found myself impressed by Patricia's rhetorical skill. She was rewriting history in real time, recasting her previous rejection as protective concern, while positioning my newfound wealth as the solution to problems that had never actually existed. Mrs. Whitfield, I appreciate your call, but I think there might be some confusion here. Brandon and I aren't together. We broke up months ago, and that situation hasn't changed. Oh, but surely you'd be open to reconsidering? Brandon has been quite clear about his regrets regarding how things ended between you. He's grown a great deal over the past few months, developed a better understanding of what's truly important in relationships, and what's truly important, in your opinion. Love, of course, genuine connection, shared values, the ability to build something meaningful together. Patricia's voice carried the smooth confidence of someone accustomed to getting her way. All the things you and Brandon had, without the complicating factors that concerned me before. I'm curious, Mrs. Whitfield. What specifically has changed about those complicating factors? Well, the financial disparity is no longer an issue, obviously, and with your new resources, you'd be able to contribute meaningfully to the family's philanthropic work, participate in our social obligations, understand the responsibilities that come with our position in the community. Mrs. Whitfield, let me make sure I understand. 3 months ago, I was unsuitable for Brandon because I couldn't contribute meaningfully to your family's philanthropic work or understand your social responsibilities. But now that I have money, those concerns have disappeared. Jessica, you're oversimplifying a complex situation. I was never concerned about your personal worthiness. I was concerned about practical compatibility issues that could have made both of you unhappy, such as your ability to navigate the social expectations that come with Brandon's position, your understanding of the financial pressures involved in maintaining our family's community commitments, your capacity to contribute to our philanthropic efforts in ways that would feel fulfilling to you. I almost had to admire her determination. Patricia was doubling down on her reframed narrative, insisting that her previous objections had been about my happiness and fulfillment rather than her class prejudices. Mrs. Whitfield, I'm going to be very direct with you. Are you calling to suggest that Brandon and I should reconcile now that I have money? I'm calling to suggest that perhaps the obstacles that seemed insurmountable before are now manageable, and that two people who clearly cared for each other shouldn't let pride prevent them from exploring whether they might have a future together. And if I hadn't won the lottery, would you be making this call? Patricia was quiet for a moment, and I could practically hear her calculating the most diplomatic response. I think that's a hypothetical question that doesn't serve any constructive purpose, she said finally. The reality is that your circumstances have changed, which creates new possibilities. Mrs. Whitfield, I need to be honest with you. I find this conversation deeply insulting. I'm sorry you feel that way. That certainly wasn't my intention. Your son had the opportunity to fight for our relationship when it mattered. Instead, he chose to prioritize your concerns about my background over his feelings for me. Nothing about that situation changes just because I now have money. People grow. Jessica. They learn from their mistakes. Surely you believe in the possibility of second chances. I believe in second chances for people who acknowledge their mistakes and demonstrate genuine growth. I don't believe in second chances for people who only change their tune when circumstances make it convenient. Patricia's voice cooled slightly. I think you might be misjudging Brandon's motivations. He's genuinely regretful about how things ended, regardless of your financial situation. Then why didn't he fight for me before? Why didn't he stand up to your objections when they were based solely on my family's economic status? Perhaps because he needed time to mature, to develop the confidence to trust his own judgment over family concerns. Or perhaps because he agreed with your assessment and only reconsidered when my bank account made me an acceptable risk. Jessica, I understand that you're hurt by how things unfolded, but I hope you won't let past pain prevent you from considering present opportunities. I stood up and walked to my office window, looking out at the Denver skyline. From my new perspective, literally and figuratively, the conversation felt almost absurd. Mrs. Whitfield, let me ask you something. If I were to pursue a relationship with Brandon now, what would be different from before? Well, as I mentioned, the practical obstacles would be eliminated. You'd be able to participate fully in our family's social and philanthropic activities, contribute meaningfully to our community efforts, provide the kind of partnership that enhances rather than complicates Brandon's position. And if I chose to use my money differently, if I decided to fund scholarship programs for undocumented students, or establish healthcare clinics in working-class neighborhoods, or support labor organizing efforts, the pause that followed was telling. I'm sure whatever philanthropic directions you chose would be admirable, Patricia said carefully. Though I imagine you'd want to consider the most effective ways to create lasting positive impact. Effective according to whom? According to established best practices in charitable giving, strategic philanthropy principles, the kind of measured approach that maximizes beneficial outcomes, the kind of approach that maintains existing power structures while appearing to address systemic problems, the kind of approach that creates sustainable change rather than temporary relief. I found myself smiling for the first time during the conversation. Patricia Whitfield was revealing exactly what I'd suspected, that her acceptance would always be conditional on my willingness to conform to her family's values and priorities. Mrs. Whitfield, I appreciate your call and your clarification of your position, but I think Brandon and I want fundamentally different things from life, and money doesn't change that reality. I hope you'll at least consider having another conversation with him. You might be surprised by how much his perspective has evolved. I already had that conversation last Saturday, and what I learned is that his perspective has evolved exactly as much as his bank account requires it to. Jessica, Mrs. Whitfield, I'm going to say something that might sound harsh, but I think it needs to be said. Your son is a good man in many ways, but he lacks the courage to love someone his family doesn't approve of. That was true when I was poor, and it's still true now that I'm wealthy. Money doesn't fix character defects. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. I see, Patricia said, finally, her voice returning to its familiar coolness. Well, I suppose everyone must make their own choices about priorities and values. Yes, I agreed. They must. After hanging up, I sat in my office chair for a long time, processing the conversation. Patricia Whitfield had revealed everything I needed to know about her character and her family's values. More importantly, she had confirmed my decision to build a life that didn't depend on other people's approval or acceptance. I picked up my phone and called my lawyer. It was time to finalize the foundation paperwork and begin the real work of determining what wealth actually meant when it was used to serve justice rather than status. 3 weeks after Patricia's phone call, the Martinez Foundation for Healthcare Equity held its inaugural press conference. I had chosen the community center in Commerce City, where I'd attended after-school programs as a child. The same building where my parents had gone for English classes when we first arrived in Denver. The symbolism wasn't accidental. The event drew significant media attention, partly because of my lottery story, but mostly because of the foundation's mission and the scope of its planned initiatives. We were announcing a $25 million commitment over 5 years to establish community health clinics in underserved neighborhoods, provide scholarships for first-generation medical students, and advocate for healthcare policy changes that would benefit immigrant families. I stood at the podium in the same gymnasium where I'd played basketball as a teenager, looking out at an audience that included reporters, community leaders, local politicians, and dozens of families from the neighborhoods our foundation would serve. My parents sat in the front row, my father wearing his best suit and my mother clutching a tissue, both of them looking proud and slightly overwhelmed. 6 months ago, I began, I was a pediatric nurse working night shifts and saving money for graduate school. Today, I'm standing here as the founder of an organization that will invest $25 million in healthcare equity for the communities that raised me. I paused, making eye contact with the audience. This foundation exists because I believe that healthcare is a human right, not a privilege determined by zip code or citizenship status. We're not here to provide charity, we're here to address systemic inequities that prevent working families from accessing the care they need and deserve. The applause was warm and sustained. I outlined our specific programs: mobile clinics that would bring preventive care directly to immigrant communities, scholarships specifically for students whose parents worked in service industries, and advocacy efforts to expand Medicaid coverage for undocumented residents. These are my communities, I said simply. My mother cleaned houses for wealthy families while I was growing up. My father built foundations and framed houses that other people would call home. They worked multiple jobs so that my sister and I could have opportunities they never had. This foundation is my way of ensuring that other families don't have to choose between medical care and rent money. Another reporter asked whether I planned to collaborate with existing Denver charitable organizations. We're absolutely open to partnerships with organizations that share our values and approach, I said. But we're not interested in collaborations that prioritize donor comfort over community needs. Our programs are designed by and for the people they serve, not by wealthy benefactors who want to feel good about their tax-deductible donations. The comment was pointed, and I could see several reporters scribbling notes. I knew it would likely be quoted in the coverage, and I didn't care. The Denver charitable establishment needed to hear that their traditional approach to philanthropy wasn't the only way to create meaningful change. After the press conference, I spent 2 hours talking with community members who had attended, listening to their stories and concerns about healthcare access. Maria Santos, whose daughter had been one of my patients at Children's Hospital, approached me with tears in her eyes. "Miss Jessica, when my little girl was sick, you were the only one at that hospital who spoke to us. You saved your daughter by bringing her to the hospital when she needed help," I replied in Spanish. "I just did my job." "No," Maria shook her head firmly. "You did more than your job. You saw us. And now you're helping other families be seen too." The conversation reminded me why this work mattered more than any social acceptance or. That evening, while reviewing news coverage of the press conference at home, I received a text message from an unknown number. "Saw your press conference. Impressive work. Would love to discuss potential collaboration opportunities. Crex Whitfield." I stared at the message for several minutes, then forwarded it to my lawyer with a note, "Document this for our records." 2 days later, Patricia Whitfield appeared at my office without an appointment. Rebecca tried to turn her away, explaining that I was in meetings all afternoon, but Patricia insisted it was urgent and that she would wait as long as necessary. I kept her waiting for 45 minutes. Not out of spite, but because I genuinely was in meetings with our program directors about clinic locations and staffing plans. When I finally agreed to see her, Patricia entered my office with the same confident bearing I remembered, but something in her demeanor seemed slightly off balance. "Jessica, thank you for making time for me," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "I wanted to speak with you about your foundation launch. It was quite impactful." "Thank you. We're excited about the work ahead." "I'm sure you are. The scope of your commitment is impressive. $25 million is a substantial investment in community health infrastructure." Patricia paused, studying my office decor, which included photos from the press conference and artwork created by patients at Children's Hospital. I've been thinking about our previous conversation, and I realize I may not have adequately conveyed the depth of my admiration for your charitable instincts. The Whitfield family has a long history of community involvement, and I can see that you share those values. Mrs. Whitfield, what exactly are you here to discuss? Partnership opportunities, she said smoothly. The Whitfield Foundation has resources and connections that could significantly amplify the impact of your programs. We've been funding healthcare initiatives in Denver for over 20 years. I leaned back in my chair, recognizing the calculated nature of her visit. What kind of partnership are you envisioning? Well, we could provide matching funds for certain programs, help you navigate regulatory challenges, introduce you to other major donors who share your interests. Our foundation has relationships with city council members, hospital administrators, and federal officials who could be valuable allies for your advocacy work. And in exchange, Patricia smiled. In exchange for helping you achieve your charitable goals more effectively and efficiently. As I mentioned before, your circumstances have changed dramatically. You now have the resources to make meaningful contributions to charitable work. I was already making meaningful contributions as a nurse. I was already advocating for underserved communities. I was already using my bilingual skills to help immigrant families navigate the healthcare system. Of course, and that work was admirable. But now you have the capacity to operate at a much larger scale, to influence policy and systems rather than just individual cases. I stood up and walked to the window, overlooking downtown Denver. Mrs. Whitfield, let me ask you something directly. Are you here because you genuinely want to support healthcare equity for immigrant communities, or because you want to associate your family name with my foundation's work? I'm here because I believe our combined resources could create more significant positive impact than either of us could achieve independently. And if my foundation chooses to advocate for policies that your family's business interests oppose, if we support healthcare initiatives that might increase your tax burden or require stricter regulations on employers, Patricia's pause was telling. I'm sure we could find common ground on approaches that benefit everyone involved. Everyone meaning wealthy donors or everyone meaning the communities we're trying to serve. I don't see why those interests have to be in conflict. I turned back to face her. Mrs. Whitfield, they're always in conflict. Healthcare equity requires redistributing resources from people who have too much to people who don't have enough. That's not a collaboration, that's a fundamental shift in how we prioritize human needs versus profit margins. Jessica, I think you're being unnecessarily adversarial. Effective philanthropy requires honest acknowledgement of power imbalances and systemic inequities. Your family's wealth comes from businesses that employ the same communities my foundation serves. Those employees often can't afford the health care they need, despite working full-time jobs. Do you see the contradiction in asking me to partner with the system that creates the problems we're trying to solve? Patricia's composure slipped slightly. I think you're oversimplifying complex economic relationships. Am I? Or am I just refusing to pretend that charitable donations can substitute for fair wages and comprehensive benefits? Jessica, this conversation seems to be going in an unproductive direction. I came here with genuine interest in supporting your work. I sat back down, leaning forward slightly. Mrs. Whitfield, let me be completely clear about something. You didn't come here to support my work. You came here because you're realizing that I now have the resources to challenge the same power structures that your family has benefited from for generations. That's a very cynical interpretation. It's a realistic interpretation. 6 months ago, I was a working-class nurse whose opinions about healthcare policy didn't matter to people like you. Today, I'm a multi-millionaire whose foundation could fund advocacy efforts that might threaten your family's business interests. This isn't about charity, it's about damage control. Patricia stood up, her mask of diplomatic friendliness finally dropping. I think you're making a serious mistake. Jessica, Denver's charitable community is relatively small, and your approach is going to alienate the very people whose support you need to achieve your goals. Which people? Wealthy donors who want to control how their money is used to maintain systems that benefit them. Politicians who depend on campaign contributions from families like yours. Business leaders who profit from keeping wages low and benefits minimal. People who understand how to navigate complex political and economic realities to create sustainable change. Mrs. Whitfield, what you call sustainable change usually means change that's slow enough and limited enough to avoid threatening existing power structures. What I'm interested in is transformational change that actually addresses root causes rather than just symptoms. And you think you can achieve that by alienating everyone who has experience and resources to help you? I smiled, feeling a calm certainty I hadn't experienced since before meeting Brandon. I think I can achieve that by building coalitions with the people who are actually affected by these problems rather than the people who profit from them. Patricia gathered her purse and coat with sharp, controlled movements. I hope you'll reconsider your approach, Jessica. Idealism is admirable, but it's not always practical. Mrs. Whitfield, let me tell you what's not practical. It's not practical to expect people to stay quiet about injustice because addressing it might inconvenience wealthy families. It's not practical to ask communities to be grateful for charitable crumbs when they deserve systemic change. And it's definitely not practical to assume that someone like me would be willing to compromise my values for social acceptance. She paused at the door, turning back to face me. This isn't over, Jessica. Denver is a smaller community than you might think, and people remember how they're treated. You're absolutely right, I said evenly. People do remember how they're treated. And I think you'll find that the communities my foundation serves have very long memories about who stood with them and who stood against them. After Patricia left, I sat in my office as afternoon shadows lengthened, thinking about the conversation. For the first time since winning the lottery, I felt completely clear about my purpose and priorities. Patricia Whitfield had inadvertently done me a favor by revealing the stakes so clearly. This wasn't just about healthcare or education or immigrant rights. This was about who gets to define community values, who gets to control resources, and who gets to decide what kinds of change are acceptable. Patricia's visit had confirmed what I'd suspected. My foundation represented a threat to the comfortable arrangements that allowed wealthy families to maintain their position while appearing charitable. I called my program directors and scheduled a meeting for the following morning. It was time to accelerate our timeline and expand our advocacy efforts. If the Denver establishment wanted a fight about justice and equity, I was ready to give them one. But first, I had one more call to make. I picked up my phone and dialed Brandon's number, ready to have a conversation that was long overdue. Brandon answered on the first. Jessica, is everything okay? Everything is fine, Brandon. I'm calling because I think we need to have one final conversation. I'd like that. Can we meet somewhere private? Maybe my place. Or yours. Actually, I was thinking somewhere. There was a pause. That seems formal. It is formal. This isn't a romantic reconciliation, Brandon. This is a closing conversation. Sunday afternoon at the Denver Art Museum felt appropriately neutral, a space designed for contemplation and perspective, surrounded by art that challenged conventional thinking. I arrived early and positioned myself in front of a large. Brandon appeared exactly at 2 p.m., looking nervous and overdressed in a suit that suggested he'd misunderstood the nature of our meeting. Thank you for coming. I wanted to talk to you about something your mother said during her visit to my office last week. His face immediately showed alarm. My mother visited your office? She didn't tell me about that. I'm not surprised. The conversation didn't go the way she'd hoped. We walked slowly through the contemporary galleries, our footsteps echoing on the polished floors. Brandon seemed to be waiting for me to elaborate, but I wanted him to ask the questions that would reveal his level of awareness about his family's intentions. What did she want to discuss? He finally asked. Partnership opportunities between her foundation and mine. She seemed very interested in collaborating on healthcare initiatives. That sounds positive. I stopped in front of a sculpture that depicted two figures pulling in opposite directions, permanently frozen in conflict. Brandon, do you understand why your mother suddenly wants to partner with me? Because you're doing important work that aligns with our family's charitable interests. Because I now have enough money and influence to potentially threaten her family's social and economic position. Your mother cares about controlling community service. There's a significant difference. I turned to face him directly. Brandon, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before answering. When you decided to break up with me 6 months ago, was it because you genuinely believed we were incompatible, or because you couldn't handle your mother's disapproval? It was complicated, he said. Immediately. There were legitimate concerns about the challenges we might face. That's not what I asked. I asked whether you believed we were incompatible, or whether you couldn't handle your mother's disapproval. Brandon was quiet for a long moment, studying the sculpture as if it contained the answer to my question. I thought her concerns were worth considering, he said finally. Which concerns? Specifically. About the difficulties that couples face when they come from very different backgrounds, about the stress that financial disparities can create, about whether you would be comfortable in social situations that are important to our family. Brandon, do you hear yourself right now? You're still repeating your mother's talking points instead of answering my question. No, you're trying to avoid taking responsibility for your decision. Let me ask you something else. If I had never won the lottery, would you be here right now trying to reconcile with me? The pause that followed told me everything I needed to know. I don't think hypothetical questions are helpful, he said finally. That's not a hypothetical question, Brandon. That's a character question. And your inability to answer it directly tells me exactly what I needed to know. We continued walking through the museum, the silence between us heavy with implications. I led him toward the exit, ready to conclude our conversation, but Brandon suddenly stopped walking. You're here now because I have $89 million in the bank. If I were still working double shifts and living in a one-bedroom apartment, you'd be planning your engagement to Caroline Ashford. That's not fair. Isn't it, Brandon? Tell me honestly, what has changed about me since we broke up, besides my financial situation? You seem more confident, more sure of yourself. I am more confident because I've spent the last 6 months discovering who I am when I'm not trying to prove my worth to people who were never going to accept me anyway. I always accepted you. No, you didn't. You tolerated me until it became inconvenient. There's a significant difference. We reached the museum's main lobby, where families with children were examining the information desk and planning their visits. The normalcy of their interactions highlighted the surreal nature of our conversation. Jessica, what do you want me to say? That I was wrong to break up with you. I was. That I should have fought harder for our relationship. I should have. That I let my family's expectations influence me too much. I did. I'm admitting all of that. I appreciate the admissions, Brandon, but they don't change anything fundamental about your character or your priorities. What do you mean? I mean that you're still the same person who chose social approval over love when it mattered. The lottery win doesn't change that reality. It just changes your calculation about which choice serves your interests better. Brandon's face flushed. You're being unfairly harsh. People can grow and change. People can learn from their mistakes. You're absolutely right. People can grow and change. But growth requires honest acknowledgement of your mistakes and genuine commitment to different behavior. What you're offering is neither of those things. How can you say that? I'm here, trying to rebuild what we had. You're here trying to access what I have. There's a difference. I started walking toward the exit, and Brandon followed, his voice becoming more urgent. Jessica, please, give me a chance to prove that I've changed. Give us a chance to see if we can build something better than what we had before. Brandon, we can't build something better because you're still operating from the same fundamental assumptions that destroyed our relationship in the first place. What assumptions? I stopped walking and turned to face him one final time. I don't believe any of those things. Your actions suggest otherwise. 6 months ago, you had the opportunity to choose love over social convenience, and you chose social convenience. Today, you're asking me to believe that you would make a different choice, but the only thing that's changed is that the social calculation now favors me instead of opposing me. So, what are you saying? That there's no possibility of reconciliation? That you're not willing to consider giving us another chance? I'm saying that I'm not interested in being with someone who only values me when it's convenient or profitable to do so. This is really it, then? You're really walking away from everything we had. Brandon, I walked away from what we had 6 months ago, when you made it clear that your mother's approval was more important than our relationship. What you're asking me to walk away from now is the life I've built since then, a life based on my own values and priorities rather than other people's expectations. And that life doesn't include any possibility of love or partnership. It absolutely includes those possibilities. But it includes them with someone who loves me for who I am, not for what I can contribute to their family's social standing or financial portfolio. I reached into my purse and pulled out an envelope I'd prepared before coming to the museum. "What's this?" Brandon asked, taking the envelope. "It's an invitation to the Martinez Foundation's first annual fundraising gala next month. You and your family are welcome to attend if you're genuinely interested in supporting healthcare equity for immigrant communities. And if we're not, then you'll stay home, and we'll continue our work without you. Either way, I'll know exactly where you stand." Brandon opened the envelope and read the invitation, which outlined the foundation's mission and the specific programs the gala would support. This is really what you want to do with your life. Work with immigrant families and community health clinics. This is what I've always wanted to do with my life. Brandon, the lottery win just gave me the resources to do it more effectively. But what about travel? What about experiencing the world, buying beautiful things, living in luxury? I smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace settle over me. I've been traveling, Brandon. I spent last month visiting community health clinics in El Paso and San Antonio, learning about successful models for immigrant healthcare. I bought beautiful things, medical equipment for our mobile clinics, scholarships for nursing students, a building that will house our advocacy center, and luxury. Luxury is being able to use my bilingual skills to help families navigate the healthcare system without worrying about whether I can pay my own bills. Luxury is seeing my parents cry with pride at our foundation's press conference. Luxury is knowing that the work I do every day makes a real difference in people's lives. Brandon folded the invitation carefully and put it back in the envelope. "I hope you'll be happy, Jessica. I really do. I already am happy, Brandon." That's the point. We walked outside into the late afternoon sunshine, and I could see Brandon's car waiting in the museum parking lot. This would be the last time we spoke as anything other than acquaintances, and we both knew it. "For what it's worth," Brandon said quietly, "I think you're going to do incredible things with your foundation." "Thank you. I hope so. And for what it's worth, I think I understand now why you can't forgive me." "Brandon, this isn't about forgiveness. I forgave you months ago, for my own peace of mind. This is about compatibility and values and the kind of partnership I want in my life. And I don't fit that vision. Not as long as your primary loyalty is to your family's social expectations rather than your own moral compass." Brandon nodded slowly, as if finally accepting something he'd been resisting. "I guess this is goodbye then. This is goodbye to what we used to be. But maybe someday, if you do the work to become the person you say you want to be, we could be friends who respect each other's choices." "I'd like that," he said, and for the first time in our conversation, his voice carried genuine emotion rather than calculated charm. 6 months later, I stood in the same community center in Commerce City, where we'd held our foundation's press conference, but this time the space was transformed for our first annual gala. Instead of folding chairs and fluorescent lighting, we had round tables with centerpieces created by local artists, a stage where community members would share their stories, and a silent auction featuring artwork and services donated by foundation supporters. The guest list included a deliberately diverse mix of people, healthcare workers and community advocates, business leaders and elected officials, families who had benefited from our programs and volunteers who had helped implement them. The goal wasn't to exclude wealthy donors, but to create a space where their voices weren't the only ones that mattered. My parents sat at the head table, my mother wearing a dress we'd chosen together at Nordstrom, my father in a tuxedo that made him look like the distinguished gentleman he'd always been. Sophia served as the foundation's volunteer coordinator, her nonprofit experience invaluable in managing the complex logistics of our programs. Dr. Chen served as the evening's keynote speaker, talking about the intersection of healthcare and social justice, the importance of addressing root causes rather than just symptoms. When she finished, she called me to the stage to present our first-year impact report. 18 months ago, I began, looking out at the audience. I was a pediatric nurse buying a lottery ticket on impulse after a grocery shopping trip. Today, I'm standing here as the founder of an organization that has served over 3,000 families, funded 50 nursing scholarships, and advocated for policy changes that have expanded healthcare access for thousands more people. The applause was warm and sustained, but I raised my hand to continue. But the most important thing that's happened over the past 18 months isn't the money I won or the programs we've created. It's the clarity I've gained about what actually matters in life. I paused, thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. I learned that worth isn't determined by other people's approval or acceptance. I learned that real wealth isn't about accumulating resources, it's about using whatever resources you have to create positive change. And I learned that the most important question you can ask yourself isn't what do other people expect from me, but what do my values require from me? After the formal program ended, I spent hours talking with attendees, hearing their stories, and listening to their ideas for expanding our work. Maria Santos approached me near the end of the evening, her daughter Elena, now a healthy 8-year-old who wanted to become a nurse like me. Miss Elena stepped forward shyly and handed me a drawing she'd made. A picture of a woman in scrubs standing next to a building labeled Community Health Clinic, with the words, "Gracias, Miss Jessica," written in careful child's handwriting. "This is beautiful, Elena," I said, kneeling down to her level. "Can I keep it in my office?" She nodded enthusiastically, and I realized that moments like this were worth more than any social acceptance or family approval I could have gained by compromising my values. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, I found myself standing alone on the stage, looking out at the community center where so many important moments of my life had taken place. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Saw the news coverage of your gala. Impressive work. You were right about everything. I hope you're happy." My phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Sophia. "Coming to pick you up in 10 minutes. Mom made pozole for the after-party at home." I smiled, gathering my things and preparing to leave. The after-party would be small and intimate, just family and close friends, eating my mother's cooking and processing the emotions of a successful evening. These were the relationships that actually mattered, the connections that had supported me through heartbreak and transformation, and would continue to anchor me regardless of external circumstances. As I walked through the empty community center, turning off lights and checking that everything was secure, I thought about the woman I'd been 18 months ago, desperate for acceptance from people who would never see her true worth, willing to compromise her values for love that was conditional and fragile. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who understood that real love, whether romantic, familial, or community-based, required courage, authenticity, and unwavering commitment to justice. Money had given me opportunities and resources, but it hadn't changed my fundamental character or values. It had simply revealed them more clearly and provided the means to act on them more effectively. I locked the community center door behind me and stepped into the cool Colorado evening, breathing in air that smelled like autumn and possibility. In the distance, I could see the lights of downtown Denver, including the building where my foundation's offices occupied an entire floor, where tomorrow we would begin planning our next phase of expansion. But tonight, I was going home to eat pozole with my family and celebrate the kind of wealth that can't be won in a lottery or inherited through privilege. The wealth that comes from knowing exactly who you are and having the courage to live accordingly. Patricia Whitfield had been wrong about almost everything, but she'd been accidentally right about one thing. I did need to understand the responsibilities that come with community leadership. Those responsibilities included using whatever platform and resources. The lottery ticket had been a catalyst, But the real transformation had been internal, the development of a clear moral compass that pointed toward justice rather than acceptance, toward community rather than conformity, toward love that was unconditional rather than transactional. 1 year later, I received an unexpected phone call that would test everything I'd learned about forgiveness, growth, and second chances. It was a Tuesday morning in November, and I was reviewing applications for our expanded scholarship program when Rebecca knocked on my office door with an unusually hesitant expression. "There's someone here to see you," she said carefully. "She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important." "It's Mrs. Whitfield." I looked up from the scholarship applications, feeling a familiar tightness in my chest that I thought I'd moved beyond. "Patricia Whitfield." "Yes. And she looks different. Older. She's been sitting in the lobby for over an hour, just waiting." I considered asking Rebecca to send her away, but curiosity won over caution. "Give me 5 minutes, then send her in." When Patricia entered my office, I was struck by "Jessica, thank you for seeing me," she said, her voice lacking its usual commanding tone. "I know I have no right to expect your time or attention." "Please, sit down," I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "What brings you here, Mrs. Whitfield?" She settled into the chair carefully, clutching her purse with hands that trembled slightly. "I came to apologize." The words hung in the air between us, so unexpected that I wasn't sure I'd heard correctly. "Apologize for what, specifically?" "For everything," she said quietly. "For the way I treated you when you were with Brandon, for the assumptions I made about your character and worth, for the phone calls and office visit where I tried to manipulate you into serving my family's interests, for believing that money could substitute for decency." I studied her face, looking for signs of calculation or manipulation, but found only what appeared to be genuine remorse. "What prompted this change of heart?" Patricia took a shaky breath. "Robert died 6 weeks ago. Heart attack. Sudden and completely unexpected." "I'm sorry for your loss," I said immediately, meaning it despite our complicated history. "Thank you." The funeral was illuminating. Hundreds of people came to pay their respects, business associates and charity board members, and country club friends. They all had lovely things to say about Robert's contributions to the community, his business acumen, his generosity. She paused, staring at her hand. "But do you know who didn't come? The people whose lives he actually touched. The construction workers who built our buildings, the service staff at our restaurants, the housekeepers and gardeners who maintained our properties. They weren't there because Robert never saw them as real people, and neither did I." "Mrs. Whitfield, please, let me finish. I need to say this." Her voice grew stronger. "After the funeral, I was going through Robert's papers, organizing his affairs, and I found something that changed my perspective completely. He'd been keeping a file of newspaper clippings about your foundation." She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder, placing it on my desk. "Every article about your programs, every mention of families you'd helped, every policy change you'd advocated for. He'd been following your work closely, and he'd written notes in the margins." I opened the folder and saw dozens of articles spanning the past 2 years, each one carefully cut out and preserved. In Robert Whitfield's precise handwriting, I could see comments like, "This is what real leadership looks like, and we could learn from this approach." "I don't understand," I said. "Why was he collecting these?" "Because he was ashamed." I felt a strange mix of sadness and validation, reading through the clippings. Robert Whitfield, who had seemed so distant and dismissive during our brief interactions, had apparently been paying attention to our work all along. "I'm hoping to accomplish something I should have done 2 years ago. Acknowledge that I was wrong about everything that mattered." She leaned forward slightly. "You weren't unsuitable for Brandon because of your background. You were too good for him because of your character." The admission hung between us, raw and unexpected. "Brandon lacks the courage to stand up for what he believes in when it conflicts with social expectations. He's a good man in many ways, but he's weak where it counts most. You deserve someone who would fight for you regardless of external pressures." "Mrs. Whitfield, This conversation feels like it's coming very late. It is coming late. Tragically late. But I hope it's not too late for me to learn something from your example. She reached into her purse again and pulled out an envelope bearing the letterhead of the Whitfield Foundation. This is a check for $500,000, she said, placing it on my desk next to the folder of clippings. It's not an attempt to buy forgiveness or partnership. It's an acknowledgement that your foundation is doing work that matters. And it deserves support regardless of our personal history. I stared at the check, processing the implications of her gesture. There are no strings attached, she continued. No requests for board positions or naming rights, or public recognition, just support for programs that I should have been supporting all along. Why now? I asked. Because Robert's death made me realize that I've spent my entire adult life trying to maintain social positions and family legacies that don't actually matter. The only legacy that matters is the impact you have on individual lives, and your foundation has already created a more meaningful legacy than my family has built over 5 generations. Patricia stood up slowly, gathering her purse and coat. I don't expect forgiveness, Jessica. I don't deserve it, but I wanted you to know that everything you said about me was correct, and everything I said about you was wrong. Mrs. Whitfield, wait. I stood up as well, feeling the weight of the moment. I do forgive you. Not because you've earned it, but because holding on to anger doesn't serve the work I'm trying to do. Her eyes filled with tears for the first time since I'd known her. Thank you. That means more than you know. Of course. What is it? I want you to volunteer at one of our community health clinics. Not as a board member or fundraising chair, but as someone who helps families navigate the system. You'll work directly with the people your family's businesses employ, the people whose labor has funded your lifestyle. Patricia looked surprised, then thoughtful. I don't have any relevant experience. Neither did I when I started nursing school. The difference is willingness to learn and genuine commitment to service. You want me to work alongside the same people I've spent my life looking down on. I want you to work alongside people who can teach you things about resilience and dignity that no amount of inherited wealth can provide. Patricia nodded slowly. When do I start? Next Monday. 8 a.m. Wear comfortable shoes and bring a willingness to listen more than you talk. After she left, I sat in my office for a long time, holding the check and thinking about the unexpected turns that life can take. Patricia Whitfield's transformation felt genuine, but only time would tell whether her commitment to change would outlast her grief and guilt. 3 months later, I received a different kind of phone call. This one from Dr. Chen, at the hospital. Jessica, I have some news that I think will interest you. We've received an anonymous donation that will fund a new position, Director of Community Health Equity. The donor specifically requested that the position focus on developing programs for immigrant and refugee families. That's wonderful. Do you have any idea who made the donation? The lawyer handling it said the donor wished to remain anonymous, but they wanted you to know that the position exists because of the model your foundation has created. I had my suspicions about the donor's identity, but I kept them to myself. What mattered was that another institution was expanding its commitment to healthcare equity. Dr. Chen, I might have a candidate in mind for that position. Oh? Someone with experience in community health advocacy. Someone with experience in understanding how systemic barriers affect healthcare access. Someone who's spent the last 3 months learning about these issues from the ground up. The following week, I submitted Patricia Whitfield's resume for the director position, along with a letter of recommendation that focused on her recent volunteer work and her commitment to addressing healthcare inequities. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who had once told me I didn't understand community responsibilities was now seeking a position that required exactly the kind of community understanding I'd been developing my entire life. 2 years after our first confrontation, Patricia Whitfield and I found ourselves working as colleagues rather than adversaries. The transformation wasn't complete. She still struggled with ingrained assumptions about class and privilege, but her commitment to learning and growth appeared genuine. Brandon, meanwhile, had moved to California, where he worked for a tech startup focused on renewable energy. We exchanged polite holiday cards but never spoke directly. Sophia reported that he'd married Caroline Ashford in a small ceremony that made the society pages, but seemed to generate little genuine enthusiasm from either family. My own life had settled into a rhythm that felt both demanding and deeply satisfying. The foundation had grown to serve over 8,000 families annually. Our advocacy work had contributed to significant policy changes at the state level, and our scholarship program had funded over 200 students pursuing healthcare careers. Our relationship had developed slowly and naturally, built on shared values and mutual respect rather than social convenience or financial calculation. When Miguel proposed during a community health fair, surrounded by families we served and colleagues we worked with, the moment felt like a celebration of everything I'd learned about what really mattered in life. The wedding planning process. Patricia Whitfield attended the wedding, sitting quietly in the back row, no longer the intimidating matriarch who had once dismissed my worthiness. During the reception, she approached me with tears in her eyes. "Jessica, thank you for inviting me. Watching you and Miguel together reminds me what love is supposed to look like. It's supposed to look like a choice," I said simply. "Choosing each other every day, choosing to grow together, choosing to face challenges as a team." Brandon never learned that lesson. Brandon can still learn that lesson, if he chooses to. Growth is always possible, Mrs. Whitfield. You've proven that. As I danced with Miguel to music played by my father's mariachi group, surrounded by family and friends and community members whose lives had intersected with mine in meaningful ways, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. The lottery ticket had been a catalyst, but the real transformation had come through the daily choice to live according to my values, rather than other people's expectations. The woman who had desperately wanted Patricia Whitfield's approval had been replaced by someone who understood that the only approval that mattered was the kind that came from staying true to yourself, even when that choice required courage and sacrifice. Money had given me opportunities and resources, but wisdom had come from the relationships and experiences that taught me the difference between worth and wealth, between acceptance and love, between conformity and authentic contribution to community. Standing there in the community center where so many important moments of my life had taken place, I realized that winning the lottery had been the easy part. Learning to win at life, that had taken everything I had, and it had been worth every difficult lesson along the way. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest upload.